So thank you, Tibor, for the introduction and moderating here this afternoon. And I am going to work through the first part of this presentation, Rethinking Manure Management with 360 Rain. And a lot of the research here at Ohio State and Iowa State we've been doing on an NRCS grant. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the first thing I'm going to do is introduce the 360 Rain and walk through the technology and where we are going. So when we saw this technology a few years ago, one of the big questions that we asked was how we could actually take this technology and apply it. And we have a couple questions up front and just want you to think about as we go through. And one of those being manure, how do we view that as a problem or an opportunity? And then how do we view nutrients, a problem and opportunity? And it obviously is going to be watershed dependent, as well as um, what maybe your crops are and some of the political pressures around that as well. So I'll let some of the manure things to Dan, but just want to pull this out as we think of just dairy manure for an example. And we're looking at roughly a penny and a half a gallon to apply the manure. And how do we reduce that application cost? And then what do we do with some of the risk of water movement? When we typically talk about manure application, we do those at the bookends of the growing season. And typically that means in early spring or late fall, and the general directory or trajectory of the water is down. If we change that and go during the growing season, that application, the trajectory of water is up, so a lot different, and we eliminate a lot of our risk. So when we look at the high clearance robotic irrigator, or HCRI, this is a picture of that in the field. And as we look at this, we saw a lot of possibilities for application in eliminating these risks, so dealing with manure as well as nutrients. So we came up with a project to demonstrate the in-season application of commercial and animal nutrient sources as a unified strategy for nutrient loss and improving grain yield. And we are doing that with an NRCS USDA grant with Iowa State. And we also have funds from H2 Ohio here in the state of Ohio. So some of the specs on the rain unit, it is an autonomous irrigator, so fully autonomous. Has 3,000 feet of 3-inch HD PE hose, and roughly or approximately you put 200 gallons a minute through that at a roughly 120 psi. That is completely dependent farm to farm also on what you have for infrastructure. So here at Ohio State, we run approximately 170 gallon a minute and 115 psi. We started out and we were quite a bit lower. We were around 95 psi and 100 gallon a minute. So varies based off infrastructure. You have 60 or 80 foot boom, so 12 or 16 drops. There, it can be configured for different row spacings. We have our machine here in Ohio set up on an 80 foot with 16 foot drop or 16 drops. It is run by a 24 horsepower diesel engine that powers a generator, has a 300 gallon tank, and you use approximately about a half a gallon an hour. So you get quite a bit of run time out of that. And the propulsion system underneath that is all electronic 3-wheel drive. And then you go into the base station and some of the nuts and bolts of this. There are relays and analog inputs to turn on valves, get flow meters and pressure signals, and there's a lot of redundancy within that system for control. Everything reports back to the rain unit. Top speed is 0.45 mile per hour. Bottom speed is 0.05, but typically you don't run anything less than 2 inches a second. When we look at the band at the bottom, at least here in Ohio where we're running row crop, it leaves a 15-inch wet band right at the base of the plant. So you pick up some water efficiency by banding the nutrients and water right at the base of the plant. It does have a manure manifold with impeller system that allows you to keep everything clear. The smallest orifice in the whole system is 3/4 of an inch, but most of the time back at the base, you're running a pump or a grinder. In our case, we're running a Razor municipal waste for our manure, a grinder pump, and it gets everything down to 1/4 inch, and we've not had any problems with plugging. And then I'll talk more about this injection skid that we are currently testing here at the end of my portion of the presentation. So the rain unit runs on a backbone. It goes out and comes back. It waters the outside rows on either side. So in an 80-foot, it waters the 20 feet on both sides and the middle 40 feet on the way back. This allows you to never drive, quote, in wet feet and reduce the chance for rutting. So again, you just work your fit way across the field. One of the beauties of this technology is this opens up irrigation or application to any size and shape of field. So you're not connected to a literal center pivot where you're stuck to one point. You can actually move the machine around and have multiple risers. And this also lets you get some of those corners where you typically wouldn't have been able to get before. So irregular shaped fields, this is the perfect machine for that. So as we look at application, this machine follows the rows. You get as planted data from the planter. It has its own RTK system. So you put a set of towers on the planter. You collect those passes as you plant, and then you make a set of paths, and that rain unit follows it. And this was a demonstration we put on for one of our field shows, and this shows the banding effect. We put blue dye in there to show those bands. This here was during the growing season, so out in the middle of the field, but to give you an idea, when we go to put on these nutrients or the liquid, typically after you have passed the plant, in less than a minute or so, the ground, there is no water or liquid directly behind it. So this is a low volume machine. So as you see, it is watering right at the base of the plant. And as we turn back around and look behind, you'll notice that there is very little of that material or liquid still actually on the surface. It soaks in extremely quickly as you pass and traverse the field. This is all controlled from an Apple phone. Right now, this is an app, and this is a few of the screenshots that I have of it. You set an application rate and your target in inches, and then you have different attributes that you can turn on. So you can inject liquid nutrients, whether that's nitrogen or micronutrients, and then you have manure injection, and you can set your rates, and it'll vary the machine speed as well as the pump control in order to hit the application rates desired. If the machine ever loses cell phone connectivity or the base tower goes down for loss of GPS, the machine stops and turns everything off. So this is a typical well site, and this is our site here in Ohio. We come out of a well, and that well is here. I'll have a laser pointer right here is our well. And as we come up, we go over to a valve, which is electronically controlled from the base station, along with pressure sensors, and that comes back around and goes into our booster skid. And then this second line out the left side is actually the manure injection, and we pull our manure when we apply it out of frac tanks. We truck that in, and that is blended together and then sent out via 6-inch lay flat hose out to our rain unit. So I get the question a lot, what typical application rates do you see? And this is just an example at 200 gallons a minute. If we were putting on a 1/2 inch of water in an 80-acre field, that's roughly 1 million gallons. If you wanted to blend that, let's say a quarter of that 200 gallons is manure, that would be roughly 270,000 gallons. That's on an 80 acre in one pass. And that would be covered in approximately 3.8 days. Typical field size they recommend is 160 acres for this machine. So I'm going to talk about a few of our field sites here in Ohio, some of the research that we've been doing on the project. We have 3 sites. One site is Beck's Hybrids. That Beck's site is a paired watershed. We have water sampling and quality measurement devices on that site. And then we have at Molly Cairn Ag Center, or MCAC, we have Field 7, and that is a randomized block design, and there are 3 treatments. We also have a third site not listed here, which is sort of our sandbox in which we get to play and do all of our future testing. And this would be like a typical field layout that we've been running here the last couple of years. This is Molly Cairn Ag Center. Field 7 here on the top is our randomized block design strips. And then 8A is our sandbox. And then this this reddish line would represent the lay flat hose. And that's been slightly different each year as we pick it up, but that's 6-inch lay flat that lays in the field. The Beck's Hybrid site, with the paired watershed, we have this field long and rectangular. It's a split watershed, so all the water on the north half or the top of the screen, surface and subsurface, runs to an outlet, and that is all separate from the south half. There's a break here in the middle of the field, and that all runs to a separate, so it's a paired water site. So results from 2023, we were still fighting the ability to get stuff in a timely manner, so we didn't start watering quite as we expected as COVID hampered getting the machine on time, but we did get some application completed. We put on 1.47 inches of water, and we had a modest difference of 8 bushel the acre, not the full potential of the machine, but enough to start getting an idea of what that was going to look like as far as comparisons. In our sandbox that year, we did a comparison of different nitrogen rates. And what I'm going to pull out here, if you look at the paired treatment, so we have our paired treatments for nitrogen application. Irrigated won every single one of those paired treatments, which isn't a surprise. But what we did notice, the optimum nitrogen application for 2023 was 170 pounds of nitrogen, and that peak yield here was 245 bushels. So that helped us understand what sort of nitrogen rates we wanted to be looking at going forward. Going into 2024 was a drought year for us, so this was our first full season. With that, we had 11 applications in field 7, so 5.5 inches of water. That's maybe a tick higher than normal, depending on the growing season. Typically, we'd see maybe 4.5 inches, depending on planting date for a corn crop. In soybeans, we hit that 4.5-inch application. That was 6 applications. We put down 3/4 of an inch. And then West 1A, we didn't irrigate in that growing season. And this was ears that were pulled partway through that growing season. And then about 30 days later, we took another sample, and here we started to really see some differences, especially in that low CPU zone for corn. We were seeing some very large differences. High CPU, not so much, but again, there was still a difference in ear girth. Soybeans, we were in significant drought, and those soybeans had reached maturity. On the non-irrigated, and then the irrigated, we were still alive and active. So we were pretty excited to see what the results were. We did take some imagery about a week after those samples were pulled, and you could see all the corn was on the top of the screen. non-irrigated was fully mature, as well as the beans in the bottom. And then we could see that also in the thermal image that there was differences in that crop. So results in field 7, pretty exciting for us. If we notice, we had about a 40-ish bushel difference, so 237 versus 189 for the peak to the max to min. And then what really came out of this, our bee treatment, we only applied 2/3 of the nutrients in season, so that was 1/3 less nitrogen. And there was no statistical difference. And in fact, we out yielded the irrigated with full nutrients. So when we start looking at having water right at the base of the plant in that environment around the roots and metabolizing nitrogen, that gets us pretty excited. Total diesel used for that year for that field was 773 gallons of diesel, and we used roughly 26,000 kilowatts of electricity. In soybeans, this gets people really excited. We had a significant difference in soybeans irrigated versus non-irrigated, so 86 versus 50, again, during drought. And we used 211 gallons of diesel and about 3,500 kilowatts. This was only on 11 acres. The big thing I want to pull out on this is we had a hurricane in late September, and about a third of the yield difference or so was from hurricane damage. We were extremely dry, and the crop health and of the non-irrigated was significantly affected from that hurricane with shatter loss. The last thing I'm going to cover is coming in 2027 is the implementation of this dry skid, and we have been testing it here this year. It was also released a year ago. This dry skid, you put any dry product, dry or granular product, through the unit, and essentially you have a bin on top of it or a seed tote, and it sits on top of there and runs through this Gandy system and goes into the water stream. So MAP, DAP, any cover crop seed, anything you could imagine, you could start feeding into the water stream. So it is self-calibrating, has load cells on it. Pretty exciting technology for us. I'm going to show a video on the next slide. This was a week ago at our field demonstration, and we were injecting soybeans. While we know that might not be typical, this was to allow everyone to see it during the field day. We injected those soybeans into the water stream, and you can see that through the glass here. And then that would go out to the rain unit and be distributed. We displayed 2 different drops, one with banding and one with seeding. So we had the machine split. But as you can imagine, this machine, by doing that, you can start putting those cover crops down earlier in the growing season or seeding crops, and they are established when the crop comes off. So in this case, you'll see in the video there are soybeans there that have been applied. And then the next picture here shows the banding effect. So if you were putting down gypsum or MAP or DAP, that nutrients in an aqueous solution and is immediately able to be taken up by the roots. And then this was an example of a grower who put on alfalfa seed and established a crop during August. So a very time that we wouldn't normally seed. So conclusions from the Ohio State side before I turn it over here to Dan. We see significant benefits of this machine operating on wells or reservoirs or lagoons with significant less capacity compared to center pivot irrigation system. So you only need 200 gallon a minute or less compared to 800 to 1,000. There is an efficiency with this machine because you're not putting that liquid into the air. Both from if you're putting manure in the air, you have the smell, but I'll let Dan talk about that a little bit as well. Efficient delivery of nutrients, ability to operate in irregular shaped fields, and then we can start looking at biologics and different nutrients that we can put down at the base and change that soil profile. And then as we look at manure in season, that there are some significant benefits to doing this during the growing season. And we're seeing that change, especially in the dairy industry here in Ohio. And that solids injection skid is the next big step that we're looking for as far as putting um, nutrients out there as well as cover crop and getting them established.